Welcome to the Dark Entry, where we delve into the depths of darkness that dwells within the human imagination and bring stories to life, whether it be fairy tales or horror stories. There is guaranteed something for everyone here at the Dark Entry. If this is the kind of thing that you enjoy, and if you are brave enough to join us, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button, and turn on all the notifications to never miss another journey through the Dark Entry. Tonight we have a spine-tingling story that will send shivers down your spine, so gather around as we explore this Reddit story. I used to be a trauma surgeon. This is what made me quit, by Reddit user Head of Spectre. In this gripping narrative, we follow the journey of a trauma surgeon whose life takes an unexpected turn. Brace yourselves for a tale of suspense, medical intrigue, and the haunting secrets that lurk within the walls of a hospital. As the story unfolds, you'll be drawn into a world of darkness and uncover the terrifying events that led to this surgeon's decision to leave their profession for good. As always, a link to this story is in the description below, so please do me a favor and go over and give this brilliant author the love they truly deserve. So with that, go ahead and dim the lights, settle in, lay back, relax, and get ready to experience an otherworldly encounter that is guaranteed to linger with you far longer after the story is finished. I used to be a trauma surgeon. This is what made me quit. I wanted to save lives. It's why I became a trauma surgeon, so I could save people and give them a second chance or a hope of recovery. I wanted to save lives. Now, I just want to forget. About a month ago, I got a call about a patient in need of urgent care. Some asshole on a motorcycle had run a red light and hit a pedestrian outside of a bar. The idiot on the motorcycle was dead, but the pedestrian survived, thank goodness. But he was circling the drain, but he was still alive. I got there about as fast as I could and immediately got prepped for surgery. The patient had suffered numerous fractures from the impact, severe internal bleeding, and one hell of a concussion. I was going to need to stop that bleeding and set their broken bones. I'd hate to call something like that routine, since it technically wasn't routine, but I've dealt with this kind of thing before. The patient in question was sedated and waiting for me when I walked into the operating room, and just about at looking at them, I knew that I had my work cut out for me. I could barely see their face underneath all the blood. They looked to be a young man, somewhere in his mid to late 20s, and he had a fairly fit physique. I figured that if we could maybe stop the bleeding, then he might have a half-decent chance of pulling through, so that was my first priority. Some shrapnel from the crash had penetrated the patient's abdomen, so I started there. I cut gently, only wide enough to remove the shrapnel, and tried to stop the bleeding. We had hooked up an IV to transfuse some fresh blood into him to keep him alive, along with something to help his blood clot. So far, it seemed to be working, and I was able to get most of the shrapnel out before I finally noticed something else that was wrong with him. I first noticed clinging to some sort of piece of shrapnel. At first, I thought that they were just bits of tissue, but bits of tissue didn't move like that, and they didn't writhe like that. This was something completely different. This was something else. This was something alive. Just looking at them, they almost resembled some kind of thin, stringy worm, and once I saw them, I knew I needed to investigate further. Something was living inside of this man, and I had to find out what. The patient was somewhat more stable than he had been when he'd started, and after making sure that his bleeding was under control, I took a closer look at his shrapnel wounds. I've heard some surgeons use the term cut and paste before. It's not the most common term out there, but I have heard it. A cut and paste, also known as a peek and shriek to some, is when a surgeon gets a patient on the table, opens them up, and finds that there's nothing they can do. There's no saving them for the inevitable. The only thing you can do is stitch them back up and prepare to deliver the bad news to the next of kin. It's a heavy feeling, realizing that you can't help the person you're standing over, the person you're supposed to save, but sometimes there truly is nothing that you can do. Either their injuries are too severe or their illness has progressed too far. As a surgeon, you learn to live with it. You don't like it, but you do the best you can and you make your peace with that. I can deal with the deaths. I can accept when I've done the best I can to save someone and failed. But the things I saw as I explored these wounds, the things I found writhing inside the patient's gut, the things that were living inside of him, I couldn't accept those. Once I disturbed them, they started to come out. I could see them slithering out through his wounds, large, thin worms. Most of them far longer than the ones I found in the piece of shrapnel I pulled out of the patient. I'd never seen anything like them before. And judging by the screams of the other doctors in the room with me, they clearly hadn't either. The worms were coming out of him. They pushed through his wounds, and I could hear some of them plopping wetly on the floor as they writhed and squirmed. All the while, the patient's broken body lay motionless on the operating table, only twitching as the worms tore through him, making the tears in his flesh wider as they escaped. I didn't need to tell the other doctors in the room to leave. They ran the moment they saw his stomach tear open and watched more of those worms come spilling out of him. As they did, all I could do was stand and watch in horror. I backed towards the door, but my hands trembling as the worms twisted on the ground. I looked back up at the patient on the table. His vitals indicated that he was still alive. All of this, and somehow, he was still alive. I didn't know how he could possibly be still alive. He had lost so much blood. Now, what those little things, those worms have done to him, there was no way he could have survived it. I mean, he should have been dead, but his vitals didn't lie. I watched the patient's body twitch, and I froze looking up at him. Part of me still felt obligated to help him, obligated to save him somehow, although I didn't even know where to begin with saving him, assuming that he could be saved. He twitched, and I saw his eyes open. For a moment, I thought that somehow the anesthesia was wearing off and he was waking up, but no. As soon as I realized that this was something else entirely, the patient lifted his head slightly and his eyes fixated on me. I stared back at him, frozen to the spot in terror, and then I heard the crack of his skull breaking. His vitals flatlined, but his head remained slightly lifted. His eyes were still locked on me, though. Part of his head seemed to come undone, as if the skull underneath had shattered and only his skin was holding it together. His eyes rolled back into his skull before he finally collapsed, and a moment later, I saw something crawling up onto his face. Some other bug. This one, ivory white. It wasn't a worm like the others. This thing was more like a cross between an isopod and a house centipede, with long, spindly legs and a thick shell. I could feel its beady little eyes on me, watching me, and I swear I could see it, thinking, sizing me up, deciding if I was right for it. Then quick as lightning, it raced toward me. My heart skipped a beat, and finally I ran, bolted through the door behind me and slammed it shut. I heard the isopod thing, whatever it was, thud against the door, and I backed away. I saw it climbing up towards the window. It seemed to stare at me for a moment before crawling up towards the ceiling and disappearing. Needless to say, we put the hospital in quarantine. Both I and the other doctors who had been in the room with me spent 3 days in isolation, getting tested over and over again to make sure we didn't have any trace of those parasites, whatever the hell they were. Then after that came the interviews. First the police spoke to us, then some kind of specialist spoke to us. asking us to go over the details over and over again. We told them everything we knew, and they said they'd be in touch if they needed us for anything, and that was it. That was 1 month ago. I haven't been in an operating room since. Hell, I can't even set foot in the hospital since I got out of quarantine. I just can't. I'm too afraid of finding those worms in the next patient I try to work on. I'm too afraid of being thrust into that nightmare all over again, not understanding what was happening or why. I'm afraid of that creature I saw crawling out of the patient's skull, the creature that only I saw and no one ever was able to find. There was evidence of it, however. The patient's skull had been split right open, and there was almost nothing left inside of him. Something had clearly been living in there, feeding on his brain matter and puppeteering his body, and whatever it was still out there. I think it's unlikely that I'll ever get a solid answer about what I saw in the operating room. I've tried to do so much research online, but I've come up with nothing. As far as I can tell, there aren't any documented encounters like mine, but based on my limited experience with the creatures living in that patient's body, I can come up with a few theories. I suspect that the thing living in the patient's head was connected to those worms somehow, farming them maybe, growing them inside the body of his host, although, for what, I couldn't even begin to speculate. Whatever it was, there was an intelligence to it, something about the way it looked at me before it emerged from the skull. The way it seemed to size me up, it almost seemed to be thinking. I can't help but wonder if it found another host, another doctor, or maybe even a patient. Dear God. I can't help but wonder if it's walking around in their skin right now, letting more of those bloody worms gestate in their guts. I can't help but wonder what it intends to do with them, and I can't help but dread what the answer might be. As we reach the end of another gripping tale, I bid you farewell from the Dark Entry. I hope this journey into the realm of darkness has left you with a sense of wonder, intrigue, and perhaps a few sleepless nights. Remember, the darkness holds countless secrets, and there are stories yet to be told. I encourage you to stay curious, explore the hidden corners of the world, and never shy away from the unknown. I would also like to express my deepest gratitude to our loyal listeners and supporters who have accompanied me on this thrilling adventure. Your unwavering enthusiasm fuels my passion to bring you more captivating tales that ignite your imagination. Also, if you've enjoyed the eerie whispers that echo through these episodes, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to never miss a new story. And don't forget to share the darkness of the Dark Entry with your fellow thrill seekers, for every tale becomes more chilling when experienced together. Until we meet again in the depths of the night, may your dreams be filled with both the beauty and the terror that lie within the realms. With that, good night, sleep tight, and I will keep the light on for you, and the tales coming.